Welcome to Grammar 5M. In this booklet, you will have 3 explanation pages. We will cover transitive passive, may, might, must, verbals and prepositional phrases, and then we'll diagram prepositional phrases with verbals. So let's get right into transitive passive. We'll open up the booklets to that front and side cover, and at the very top, we're going to review what a transitive and intransitive verb is first. So let's figure out transitive and transitive verbs. Remember at the beginning of this level that we covered these two with linking verbs. Remember that transitive verbs transfer their action to a direct object. Intransitive verbs are simply an action verb that are completed by the subject. So let's look at 2 examples. They created a line by the door. They is our subject. They are completing the action of creating, and then line is receiving that action. So they transferred the action of create to line, making this a transitive verb. Whereas the next sentence, we have we waited in line for an hour. We have we completing the action of waiting, but nothing is receiving that action of waiting. Instead, in the predicate, we just have 2 prepositional phrases giving us more information about how or where this is occurring or when. So therefore, we have an intransitive verb. It is not transferring the action of the verb. So now we're going to introduce transitive passive, which is a 3rd type of action verb. And it's slightly different because it transfers its action to the subject of the sentence. So because we have transitive and transitive passive, we are now going to label transitive as transitive active so that we don't get confused between the two. Let's look at an example of transitive passive. Ty's money was stolen. So here we have our main verb is stolen. It is an action verb and it is occurring, but the subject of the sentence is receiving the action. It is not completing the action. Whereas if we look at the next one, we have Ty stole the money. And so steal is being completed by the subject and is being transferred to that direct object. So let's figure out and talk through how a transitive passive verb phrase is kind of created. So transitive passive will always have to be as its helping verb. And to be will be in any tense or form that you have already learned. And you've learned a lot. You've learned past, present, future, as well as progressive and perfect. So here we have one more example. The houses have been demolished. So once again, our main verb, demolished, is in that same form. Essentially, it's in perfect form. But then have been helps us to identify the tense and form of the whole verb phrase. So have been is a present perfect form. So altogether, these 3 create the verb phrase, with demolished being our action that is being transferred back to the subject. It's transitive passive. Before we look at more examples, I'm also going to introduce may, might, must. So we've already learned a lot about helping verbs, having learned a lot about progressive and perfect and future tense. But today and in the next few booklets, we're going to learn about helping verbs that can help express other conditions of the main verb. So once again, we have learned that helping verbs can convey the tense of a verb phrase, like we have will leave, and that is future tense. But now we are learning about helping verbs that can express other conditions of that main verb. So may, might, must are helping verbs that express the certainty or probability of the main verb occurring. Our first example on the page is I may go to the store if I'm not too tired. Our first verb phrase is may go, and the if I'm not too tired provides more context as to the probability or certainty of that verb occurring, of me going to the store. But if we look at that first clause by itself, I may go to the store, and we don't have that extra context, we can kind of assume in our head that this of me going to the store is a 50-50 probability. I might or I might not. And then the next thing we have is I might go to the store. And so here, when it's by itself, the probability of the action occurring diminishes. A lot of people use may and might interchangeably, but in fact, there is a slight difference between the two. And then, of course, when we get to must, the probability of the action occurring is incredibly high. Not 100%, but it's like 98% sure that it's going to happen. So our example for this is, I must go to the store. It is a thing that will most likely happen. It needs to happen. And so this kind of gives you that spectrum of may, might, must. Remember that when you use these, you'll notice that the main verb is generally in a present tense. You could say, I go to the store, and then I must go to the store gives us more context of me going to the store. Whereas if we look at it with other types of verb forms, you could still use it with progressive and perfect. But when it's just one of the simple tenses, it's most likely going to be with present tense. So let's put it all together and look at some example sentences. The coat may be in the closet is our first sentence. And what we're going to do, this is going to be very similar to what you'll do in the booklet, is we're going to identify our subject and our verb phrase and anything in the predicate that can give us more information as to what's going on with the verb. So that means you'll find PNs, PAs, IOs, and DOs. But you don't need to do anything with the prepositional phrases. So we'll get started with the subject of the sentence, which is coat. And then our verb phrase is may be. And there's nothing in the predicate outside of that prepositional phrase, so I don't need to mark anything. So now I will list all or any of my helping verbs. And remember, the main verb will always be the last verb of the verb phrase. So we only have one helping verb in this sentence, which is may. And then our tense of this verb is essentially, of the main verb, is essentially like a standard present tense. So we are going to write present. And then what type of verb is this? Well, there's no action being completed by the coat. So what we have here is a linking verb. May be is linking the coat to more information in the predicate. The coat may be in the closet. There's a 50-50 probability that it's going to be in that place, in that closet. Our next one is going to be Mom might have cleaned the closet. Our subject is Mom. Our verb phrase is might have cleaned, so I'm going to double underline the whole thing. And then in the predicate, we have the closet. Closet is receiving the action of being cleaned, therefore it is a direct object, so I'll label that. So I'm going to write my helping verbs, might have. I'm going to identify the form. Our three options in this activity are going to be present, perfect, and progressive. So in this instance, it's perfect. And then what type of verb is it? Well, we have our subject completing an action, so it's not linking. And then we have a direct object receiving that action. So it's not intransitive and it's not transitive passive because we have that direct object and the predicate. So I will label it as transitive active. Our next sentence is Bill must have been delayed by the confusion. Our subject is Bill. And our verb phrase is quite long. It's must have been delayed. So I double underline the whole thing and I identify my helping verbs. First, I will look for any direct object. I don't have any. I just have a prepositional phrase. So I can go ahead and write my helping verbs must have been. And then the form of my main verb is going to be perfect. And now I need to identify the verb type. So what I need to identify is first, my main verb is delayed. That is an action, so we're not looking at a linking verb here. And now we need to identify if the subject is completing the action and transferring it to something else on the predicate. We did not label a DO, so we know it's not transitive active. So it's either going to be intransitive or transitive passive. So let's read it again. Bill must have been delayed. Is Bill completing the action of delaying something? No, he's not completing this action. He's actually receiving this action as a subject, meaning this is going to be a transitive passive verb. And then our last sentence is going to be Bill will be leaving for work. And so I'm going to identify my subject and my verb phrase, will be leaving. And once again, I have for work as a prepositional phrase, and quickly is an adverb. So I don't have anything in the predicate receiving the action of the verb. So I'll write my helping verbs, will be, and then leaving is in progressive form, so I'll write that. And then, like I said, I don't have any direct object, but I do have an action verb. So it's either intransitive or transitive passive. And so is Bill completing this action in the verb phrase? Yes, he is the one leaving. So we have an intransitive here. So take your time as you're going through these activities and just ask yourself the questions we went through. Who's completing this action? Who or what is receiving the action, if anybody? And you should be able to reference that front inside cover whenever you need a little extra help. You'll also notice with may, might, must that we're having you simply identify them as helping verbs, and you can see the spectrum of it on this page, but it won't be something that you have to know incredibly well like we did with the progressive and perfect form in Grammar 4. And then the last thing we're going to go over before diagramming is prepositional phrases with verbals. So in the last book, we went over prepositional phrases that that are inside with a verbal phrase. So now we're going to examine verbals in a prepositional phrase. So remember that gerunds will only ever act as a noun, and infinitives can act as a noun, adjective, or adverb. So you'll want to make sure you're analyzing what's going on within each phrase as well as within each sentence. So let's look at one example. The books for referencing are available. Our prepositional phrase is for referencing, and referencing is the OP of the prepositional phrase, and the whole prepositional phrase is adjectival because it's modifying a noun, books. And then we have the example sentence, the dog with a broken toy eats with a voracity to fear. So what we have are two prepositional phrases with a broken toy, and broken is a past participle modifying the OP, toy. And then to fear is also modifying an OP of the second prepositional phrase, voracity. So it's relatively straightforward as long as you remember the functions of each of the different verbals that we've learned. And this is going to be what we're going to do in this activity, or the type of activity we'll do in this book. In this instance, I'm going to have us find the subject and the verb phrase, but as you progress through the booklet, we'll just have you focus on the verbals themselves. So let's find that subject. We have water, and then was sitting is our verb phrase. The bottled water was sitting near the building. And now we just need to find our two verbals. So bottled is one and building is the other. So we're going to write the first verbal of the sentence, which is bottled, and we need to identify what's it doing in that sentence. It's not functioning as anything. Past participles always modify a word, and in this instance, it's modifying water. It's what type of water it is bottled water. And then we have our second verbal, and that's going to be building. It's going to be functioning as something, so I'm going to circle that. And now we need to identify what the gerund is doing in that sentence. Remember, gerunds can act as nouns, so they could be a subject, do, or even an OP now. And so we can see in this sentence, it is not the subject, and it is not receiving the action of the verb. Instead, it is that OP. It is near the building, building being the noun, ending the prepositional phrase. Notice that in this, we are not looking for the entire prepositional phrase in this activity, nor are we looking for an entire verbal phrase. We're just looking for the verbals by themselves. And now we will do some sentence diagramming with prepositional phrases with verbals. Let's look at our sentence. The cake with the shaved coconut was served by the bride-to-be. I like to always start with my subject and verb, so we have cake and was served as our verb phrase. And then everything else in here are just modifiers, because notice we have a transitive passive verb. So we have the cake, so the is modifying cake, and then with the shaved coconut is an adjectival phrase. And then we have by the bride-to-be, which is modifying how it was served, by whom it was served. And so now we can start making our diagram. Because we have so much going on within the phrases, I won't jumble it up too much for us. So I have my long horizontal line intersected so that we have a subject and predicate. And now everything else is going to be a modifier. So we have an article for our subject, and then we have that adjectival prepositional phrase for our subject. So I create that little section, and then within that prepositional phrase, the OP has two modifiers. So I have one line, and since that second modifier, shaved, is a past participle, I make a curved line off of that. And then for the verb, I also have a prepositional phrase modifying it. So I create that same kind of arm. And then we have a modifier. And then we have an infinitive as a modifier. So I have to create that with a little pedestal and the arms coming off. So now we can start filling it out. We have our subject and our verb. And then, like I always say, this is essentially the core of our sentence. It's the main idea of the sentence. Cake was served, and everything else is just giving more information about this main idea. So the cake with coconut. What type of coconut? It's the coconut, and it's shaved coconut. So both of those come off of coconut. And then we have was served, and then we have by bride, by the bride. And then what else about the bride? She's a bride to be. So both of those are modifying bride, so we'll be coming off of them. And notice how colorful it is right now because I'm showing you the different parts of each of the prepositional phrases. But always remember that the entire prepositional phrase is acting as one unit with the shaved coconut. The whole phrase is modifying cake. By the bride to be, the whole phrase is modifying our verb. So that's how you will diagram this type of sentence. Always make sure you're paying attention to how the verbals are relating to the other words in the sentence. And if you have any other questions about grammar, please contact the person who grades your grammar at the Gideon Center.